Our next speaker is our penultimate speaker before lunch. Very excited. I had the pleasure of sitting opposite him at dinner yesterday, so I heard some glimpses of what you're going to be hearing now. So let's have a big round of applause, please, for Thomas.
Okay, tough spot before the lunch, I guess. Being a neuroscientist is always thinking about how we act and how we respond in terms of conditions and in terms of context. My background is in neurobiology. I'm here actually on kind of two feeds. One is on behalf of Lowe's Innovation Labs, and I'll talk very briefly about what that is, but also I'm the CEO of my own company. And my talk here today is going to be about uncommon partnerships and basically what can drive innovation and the dynamics and the synergies that can come out of making some very disruptive new things that you couldn't see, you couldn't predict, you couldn't imagine, and what that actually entails. For those, I'm very happy to be here, first of all, because also, I've been in IIeX in the US a couple of times, and I see this as a very important and forthcoming growing conference as well. And I think it's very good to see this happening in Europe as well. And that's why Lowe's, everybody might be thinking here, what is Lowe's? I think many people they know what Home Depot is, right? So Lowe's is the closest competitor in the US and in North America to Home Depot. So it's a home improvement company. And that's kind of the uncommon partnership idea in itself. So how can a home improvement company make disruptive innovation? And that's something I will talk about today. Before we start going into innovation, I want to test you a bit. I want to ask you to do a task with me. We will just do that mentally by ourselves, but it's also about what can hinder innovation. Why doesn't innovation happen at the corporate level, at the level we want it to be? So if you take kind of a traditional behavioral economics experiment, we say if you have a coin flip, and do that 10 times, for example, and the opportunity is to win $5 or euros, and you lose $2. So it's a 50-50 chance of winning. How many of you would actually make that choice? How many of you would take that gamble? Not many, a few of you. So what about the opportunity of winning 10 or losing $4? Some of you more, yeah. 12 versus losing 6, more and more. And hopefully winning 18 and losing 12. So some of you might think, okay, this is kind of a 50-50 gamble. It doesn't kind of feel right to make that kind of first move there to say, well, $5, I can win $5, but I can also lose $2. That's a pretty good thing, but there's fewer of you that would actually end up making the choice of betting for the $18 win versus the $12 lose. This is kind of a well-established phenomenon that everyone here in this room and humanity as a whole is loss averse. We are loss averse to the extent that, how many of you should take the 18 versus 12? I guess all of you should do that, I guess. Because it's, rationally speaking, the chances of winning 18 versus losing 12 is, all things being equal, very high. So especially if you do this 10 times, 100 times, for example, the return of investment is always going to be high, even for the last one. But it doesn't feel right. The gut feeling is that, no, it doesn't feel right to make that choice of winning 18 versus losing 12. And that might be kind of a driving factor when it comes to innovation itself. We call this the loss-averse factor. So basically, you can sum it up as two things. I hate losing more than I love winning. And also the other thing is we call it the 2-to-1 ratio. Most people have to have something like twice as much in amount that they can win as opposed to what they can lose before they start accepting the gamble. So that means that risking something, you need to outweigh the risk with the benefits twice as much. When we do innovation, we are not that fortunate. We are not that fortunate that we know the ratio. We don't know if it's 50-50, 30-70. No, it's an ambiguous situation because we can't foresee the future. We can't foresee the outcome of an innovation process. And what we can see when we do brain scans, for example, is that the response of people, the brain responses to people, when they are in an ambiguous situation, are much stronger. The brain responses, like a fear response, is much stronger compared to when they're doing risky choices. So this means that when we are looking at parts of the brain that are active when we are fearful, for example, watching a horror movie, we see that those same parts of the brain are also, of course, active when you're making a risky choice, but they're even more active when you have an ambiguous choice. So this means that we are ambiguity averse, even more than we are loss averse. And this is actually one of the big problems when it comes to innovation, is that it's always safe to go with the crowd, so to speak. You know, doing the same things as your peers, you're not doing anything wrong, you're not sticking out, you're not taking a chance, and you're not going to be punished for it. Taking a big leap, trying a new methodology, trying a new project is always going to be risky. And it's ambiguous. So that's part of the reason we're sitting here, is trying to see, kind of reduce that ambiguity, look more like a kind of informed risk in a way. So hopefully, let's see if we can get to that. Another part that is very interesting when it comes to kind of thinking about corporate situation is, I love this quote from Voltaire, our wretched species is so made that those that walk the well-trodden path always throw stones at those who are showing a new road. This is all about innovations, as I see it. So that means basically that when we have new innovation, new things coming along, not only do you have to deal with ambiguity and risk, no, you also have to deal with peer pressure, for example, standing out, being the oddball. This is very personal. This is individual. And that is one of the hindering factors when we talk about innovation. So taking all this into account, what kind of world are we living in? This is almost like an overused concept, but we are living in an exponentially changing world. We see that every single day. When, tomorrow, we will see technology that far surpasses what happens today, what we know today. We see that the kind of technology we have today has been on this increasing slope. Things are changing faster and faster and faster. But as humans, we can't think or understand exponentiality or exponential change. We think linearly. This means that when we are trying to think about risks, when we try to think about ambiguity, we're still on a linear slope. And as I say, you don't do anything wrong by making incremental changes, incremental improvements on existing products or solutions. No. But the problem is, as we've seen with some brands, is that that might be the path to doom. Simply because overnight, you will see changes happening you couldn't foresee because we don't understand that. And also the whole thing about exponential change is ambiguous by itself. Exponentiality in itself is ambiguous. And that's why innovation, we all are very happy to talk about innovation, but actually true disruptive innovation is hurting. It's dangerous. It doesn't feel right sometimes. It has this kind of stomach ache to it. So let's see if we can do something about that. We can start off by saying it's risky not to take risks. We have tons of examples of companies that have been prone to not taking risks or not enough risks, simply because there were risks. And we're living in this changing world, an exponentially changing world, so we actually need to change the way we are looking at risk in total. And as I say, making incremental changes might still be good, but you need to make some of those big leaps as well. And think of it this way, it's actually risky not to take risk. It's actually changing, it's flipping the gut feeling a bit. And say, hey, maybe I have to take some risks. That might be very hard to incorporate at the corporate level, but this is something we definitely need to work with. And another quote that I like to throw here before giving you some examples here is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. This goes very much to the exponential slope again. What we see coming on the horizon, things will appear tomorrow that we could never dream of. As we've just heard earlier today, we have technology today that was unthinkable 5 to 10 years ago. What will the next 5 to 10 years bring? It's probably going to be even more change. And you cannot get on this wagon too early. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you kind of a very brief trip through the Lowe's Innovation Labs. Because what does Lowe's, this home improvement company, have in common with neuroscience, augmented reality, virtual reality, robotics, and 3D printing? Initially, maybe not that much, but that's what Lowe's is doing. They're making these disrupting new technologies. They're not only applying them, but they're co-developing these technologies. And what they're doing is basically to take in different solutions and try to adopt them in the way that they want it to be. So take, for example, 3D printing. What is one thing that can kill the Lowe's innovation, Lowe's home improvement, the IKEA, for example? What can kill those companies? 3D printing can, if it's big enough, because people can start print in their own home, maybe. So it can. So instead of pushing that away from you, how about taking that into your own lab and see how can you actually employ that? How can you actually use 3D printing as a home improvement company to assist your clients or your customers? This is what Lowe's Innovation Labs is all about, is taking those new disruptive technologies and employing them in the house instead of pushing them away. So for example, you might have heard about the HoloRoom. This is an augmented reality solution that Lowe's have built inside a store environment. So it's basically a store environment in a store environment, so to speak. You can walk into this HoloRoom. You can scan your own home. It could be your living room. You can portray that through kind of a big tablet, so you can see your own room. And I won't play any video here today, but basically what it can do is allows you then to, instead of imagining how a tile would look on the wall, is actually displaying the tile on the full wall for you. So that's kind of changing the way in which customers are interacting with your products. And of course, you then link that directly to your purchase system, and there you go, you can have that ordered right away. So that's one thing. We have all these, sorry, let's go back here. We have all these different disruptive technologies, and by in themselves, they have a lot of value. So they're providing, hey, now we can do robots in the store for clients. Maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't, but let's try that out. Let's do the same thing for 3D printing. Let's do the same thing for augmented reality or virtual reality. Does it really change? We need to test that out. But now I'll do another test on you, and I'm going to reveal afterwards what that actually means. So I'm going to ask you to take each of those words. We have cottage, Swiss, and cake. There's a fourth word that actually is related to those words. Anyone would like to guess that? Cheese. That's correct. That's a good one. That's an easy one. We had an intermediate one. Flower, friend, scout. Girl, maybe. Yeah, let's see. Stick, maker, point. Sorry? Let's have a look. That's good. Why do we do this? Well, this is what we call remote associations. You take different concepts and you find out what they have in common. Our ability to be creative and innovative relies on this ability. The ability not only to work within a single field, but also to bring together very disparate things in a meaningful new way. That is true innovation. So our ability to be truly creative and truly innovative is to build bridges, see associations when nobody else is doing it. That is part of the magic when it comes to doing disruptive innovation. You start off a project on 3D printing. You do one with HoloRoom. You do one with neuroscience. And maybe you can bring that together. Maybe that can have some kind of dynamic or integrated meaning. So what we have done, for example, part of my own company, is actually to provide the neuroscience part to test the effect of neuroscience, to test the effect of the HoloRoom in brain scale, so to speak. So what happens to the brain when you are actually looking at the augmented reality solution? Does that change how people perceive products? Does it change how they perceive the environment? What we have found is that when we are looking at things like emotional arousal, for example, things like, we all know how it feels like being shocked in a horror movie, for example, or when we are extremely hungry, physiological changes. We can measure those changes. And when we look at the arousal, the motivation, which is kind of an approach versus an avoidance motivation, we see that when people are in the augmented reality solution, they seem to have a higher engagement, so to speak, emotional engagement. They're more engaged. What we also see is what we call the cognitive load, which is the amount of information you're processing at any one time. So information overload, for example. The amount of information that people are processing at any one time is lower in the augmented reality solution. So this you could never have done if you only did neuroscience or only did augmented reality. And you'll need to bridge these two technologies together in order to provide these insights. So that means that what we know now is that when people are in this augmented reality, it kind of cleans the clutter. It takes away a lot of the noise that you normally would associate in this kind of busy store environment. It takes away a lot of the imagination you need to do. It saves a lot of marriages, hopefully. They call it the marriage saver. I think that's for good. But basically, when you also look at different products, such as a faucet, we also see that the emotional response that people have to the faucet in the augmented versus the real store, we see that the emotional responses are much stronger. Same thing when it comes to robots. Lowe's have recently released robots, so to speak, inside a store environment in California. So these are robots that are fully automatized. They navigate the stores. They will interact with you, speak to you. They are bilingual, so they can also speak Spanish. But the question is, how humanoid, how human-like should the robot be? Not only kind of the features, like a kind of robot look, but also in terms of the voice. Because there's a well-known phenomenon called the Uncanny Valley, that if something becomes, how should I put it, close enough to be human, but not really human, it freaks people out. People are freaked out. There's a negative effect. So everybody wants to avoid the Uncanny Valley. Understanding what triggers the Uncanny Valley effect, it's poorly understood. So what we're doing is testing the effect of different kinds of robot interactions. Anything from standing still to moving, to different kinds of voices, different kinds of layouts. So should it look like this, more clunky, or should it be humanoid in a way? And if you're down in the valley, if people are freaking out, where should you move? Should you make it more clunky again, or should you work really hard and invest more money to make it more human-like, which is really hard? So this is something where you see that neuroscience and robotics, as opposed to the previous slide where neuroscience and augmented reality go together to have this kind of mutually information. So you learn something new, not only about the brain, well, that's one thing, but also how people respond emotionally and cognitively to this new disruptive technology. And of course, once we do this, there are several ways in which we can iterate, we can change, we can also see, we'll learn a lot about the brain as well, of course. And just thinking about having neuroscience in general. I'm a neuroscientist by training. Until recently, I've been a professor at the Copenhagen Business School, applying neuroscience to business in general. And what we have published, is actually the effect of training people in understanding creativity in the brain, what actually creativity and innovation is. And we've found that just training people on understanding and taking in what creativity is can actually boost people's creativity. On average, we've found a 28% increase in people's creativity when we measured that on standardized measures. The range was from 10 to 200%. So this means that just employing neuroscience, the insights we have from what it actually is, what actually the brain does, can change the way that we perceive ourselves, but also the way in which we do business. So without further ado, I think my time is up, and thank you for your attention.
Do we have any questions for Thomas? There's a lot to process there ourselves.
And just before lunch as well. Sure, the whole room.
Brilliant. Okay, this is better.
Thanks.
The Hollow Room. When customers come in and they want to experience their own layout using this technology, don't they have to upload or somehow provide their own floor plans so that they can actually, well, you get my drift.
Yes, there are several ways. So several ways in which that works. One, which I can call the idealized version, is that they basically have an app that can scan with a camera, with a smartphone, can scan their own home. So basically using some kind of 3D recognition of where you are in space, and you can scan your own room, basically. So that's what, ideally, what the goal is with, you scan your own, you download the app to your smartphone, you scan your own room, you bring that to the store, and there you go. You kind of project that on the whole room. So if that goes to your question, this is actually about acoustics, so I'm not sure whether I heard the full answer to that, the question. Was that to your point? Okay. So that's the ideal. I don't think they're completely there yet, but that's at least what will be going on. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Thomas.